Great. So here we are to talk about Vagrant. Just before I begin here, can I get a quick show of hands? Who in this room is a web developer or would consider themselves developers? Any developer managers in here? People who manage other developers? Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think this is probably aimed most at both developers and people who manage developers. If you're not in that category, I think this is still interesting stuff, and really we'll show you a good tool, but I think you'll get the most out of it as a developer. Let me just hide this little thing. There we go. Yeah, so before we get too into it, just quick about me. My name is Rob Bayless. I am the CTO over at Last Call Media in Northampton. I've been a PHP developer for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years, mostly working in Drupal. I'm pretty active in the Drupal community. I consider myself a lead architect on a lot of projects as well as a developer. And I'm also in the education space. I do a lot of training and speaking at conferences like this. Doesn't mean I'm good at it, but you know, they let me do it. And I really like open source. The company I work for, Last Call, I'm sure you've probably heard them mentioned today. They're a big sponsor of this event, and the owner, Kelly, was one of the organizers. Great organization. We do start to finish web projects from design to completion. But enough about me. So we're here to learn about Vagrant. And first of all, we have to define what Vagrant actually is. So at its simplest, Vagrant is a tool for creating portable development environments. So has anyone used something like MAMP or XAMPP or WAMP? Probably most of you. Cool. So it is a little bit like MAMP or WAMP or any of those in that it will let you download a development environment to use locally. The difference is that Vagrant is a tool that you can use to create new development environments. It's not just a typical LAMP stack or what have you. You could use it for Ruby. You could use it for really anything that you desire. Do we have any Ruby developers in the room? All right, cool. Nothing against Ruby, just it's a different animal. Okay, so why use Vagrant? Vagrant, when we talk about it in comparison to these other tools, Vagrant will allow you to quickly spin up your new developers with a custom stack. So if you use, I'm just going to say MAMP, just for consistency's sake. If you use something like MAMP, you get the stack that they give you. You have no customization options beyond, sometimes they let you choose like a version of PHP or something like that. But in reality, most of our servers aren't configured like a MAMP stack. So right away, you have an issue where your production server that you're deploying to is different from your local environment. So Vagrant will let you make these complex local environments and share them with the people on your team. Yes, that's point 2. You can have multiple environments. So you can have, for example, a PHP 5.3 environment, a PHP 5.4 environment, and a PHP 5.5 environment all running on your computer all at once. So that's kind of nice. And last but not least, I touched on this earlier, but it lets you closely emulate the production environment that you're going to be deploying to. That's super important. If you've ever heard, we always hear in web development, never develop on production, and there's a reason for that. So we get these local stacks, and we do all our development offline, and we all use version control, I'm sure of that, and we all do a great job of following best practices. But the problem is if we're developing in this environment where, we're sure of, say, our PHP version locally, but maybe it's different from our production server. So really, what we need to do is make sure that everything is the same. We control all the variables in the development equation. So if you've ever deployed to a production server and had something just massively fail, you can probably appreciate this GIF. Oh, yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, this has happened to me. I'm sure, probably none of you have ever had this experience, but you deploy out and, you haven't thought of like some difference between PHP 5.3 and 5.2 or what have you, and something just critically, massively fails. So we're trying to avoid that by using a production-like development stack locally. So if you think about this, really what we're doing here, we're trying to get a machine that is just like our production environment down to our local development box. So typically the tools that you would have used to do that a few years ago are virtualization tools like VirtualBox, VMware, Parallels. There's a bunch of them that'll allow you to run these virtual computers within your development computer. And so yes, that is awesome. That's part of the solution that Vagrant offers is a virtualized development environment where you've got a computer inside your computer, which I think is really cool. I'll say that a lot. But so Vagrant actually leverages VirtualBox, which is an open source tool from Oracle, to do all of its virtualization. So let's talk about the basics of Vagrant before we get into the actual usage of it. Vagrant is a command line tool, so you're going to need to use it from the command line. If you're not comfortable with that, Vagrant might not be the right solution for you. But if you are, these are the commands. You've got, starting from the beginning, when you want to create a new Vagrant instance, you've got Vagrant init. After that, to bring up that instance, you would type Vagrant up, which just boots the virtual machine. And then you've got Vagrant SSH, which will allow you to shell into the virtual machine and then do your development. And then after you're done, you can run Vagrant halt to shut down the VirtualBox, and then destroy will completely erase it. And all of your changes that you've made inside of there will be destroyed. So the idea is that you have your code base, which you'll be developing on, and that lives on your physical machine. And then you've got this Vagrant environment that's running inside, and you share your code base into it, do your work, and then you can just destroy the environment afterwards. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have questions at this point, or should I just keep going? All right, no questions. Yeah?
Well, I was just kind of messing around. So I tried just typing Vagrant inside of the Vagrant box. I see from my command line a whole bunch of hash crazy numbers. Is that the box? Is that what they just
When your box is running, you can shell into it. That's probably what you did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here's a question about destroying.
Yep.
So I have my web app that I'm working on,
Mm-hmm.
and I built a nice Vagrant box around it, and it's running, and I make all these changes and updates to my web app. When I destroy it, it's just destroying the box. And when you're saying like any changes that you've made to the box, that's not changes you've made to your web app. But
Correct.
tweaks to the environment in there, or settings to the web server, yada yada yada.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
what gets destroyed.
Exactly.
Or
Well,
app.
you have to be careful. Make sure that your code base is living in a shared folder, so it's actually living on your physical computer and that you're sharing it in.
Right.
So that's an important distinction, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But yes. For Lingo, we've got Vagrant Box. This gets kind of confusing, but Vagrant Box is an instance of a VirtualBox VM that's been provisioned and started using the Vagrant command line tools. Vagrant boxes are built from something called a base box. So a base box is essentially your template, what you start from. So that's a VirtualBox machine that's prepackaged for use with Vagrant. When I say the word provision, what that means is after the Vagrant box has booted, when the server has gone through its startup process, provisioning is where we do things that we need to create our local development environment. So things like installing Apache, MySQL, stuff like that. And finally, VAGRANTFILE, which is the single configuration file for defining what a Vagrant box consists of. So you say what base box you're going to use, you say what your provisioning is going to be, etc. So I want to back it up 1 second and talk about installing Vagrant. It's actually really easy. There's 2 main steps. Just downloading VirtualBox, which is the virtualization technology that Vagrant runs on, and then downloading Vagrant. These are links, and they will be in the presentation, which will be posted after this session. Once you've installed VirtualBox and Vagrant, you just create a new box. You could use this command, this Vagrant init command, and this would initialize a new box with the Debian distribution, the Wheezy distribution, which is, I think, 6.5. Might be wrong about that. And then just starting the Vagrant box. That's kind of all you need to get started. So I'm going to walk you through a basic example, and we're going to cross our fingers and just really hope that the internet stays good. Can everyone see this okay? Cool. So here I am inside of a Vagrant directory. You can see that I've got this Vagrant file, which I'll talk about in a second. So I've already run the command vagrant init here, which has created my Vagrant file for me. And so this is all I need to get a Vagrant box started. Now I can boot it up by typing Vagrant up. And what's happening here, it's importing my base box, which is called rvalis/Debian Wheezy. And now it goes through the boot steps. So it's creating a computer inside your computer. It's easy. It is. It's really inception. You can have Vagrant boxes inside your Vagrant boxes too, but that gets kind of crazy. Cool. So that's it. It's ready. So now you can see that I am on my MacBook Pro here, but if I type in Vagrant SSH, it shells me into the Vagrant environment. So you can see that it's just called localhost, which is probably a terrible name. I should have given it a better one. But yeah, so I'm inside the computer that's inside my computer now. All right, that's the basics. Let's talk about that Vagrant file for a second. So that's where all your magic happens. This is the basic structure that we're going to be working with. You've got this, it's actually a Ruby file. And so you say configure, and then there's stuff that goes inside this configure block, where that stuff goes here is. And I'm going to walk through what can go in there. So you have your base box. So in this case, I would use a base box called Puppet Lab/Debian 7564 Puppet. You could change that, and it would change the base box that you're building off of. So if you wanted to do, if you wanted to switch it so it's using, let's say, Debian 6.5, you could just find a new base box for it and specify that there. Now, this is a little bit tricky. Recently, something has been released called Vagrant Cloud, which allows you to find base boxes very easily. And what you're seeing here, this Puppet Lab/Debian 7564 Puppet, is actually a reference to a box that's hosted on the Vagrant Cloud. I'm going to talk a little more about that later. Okay, so when you have this virtual machine, it's only actually useful to you once you can access it from your computer. So in web development, what we're going to be doing is actually visiting pages in the browser to see what happens. So when we want to hit this computer in our browser, we need to give it an IP. So here we create a private network that you can only hit from the host machine, which is your physical computer. And so when using this, when we go to 192.168.33.10 in our browser, it will go into the virtual machine and hit port 80 on whatever machine you have installed there. I talked about shared folders earlier. This is really important. You're going to want to make sure that anything that you need to maintain outside of that Vagrant box stays on your physical computer and gets shared in. So this is the configuration option for the synced folder. And so in this example, we would just have a folder called data, which lives right below our Vagrant directory. And it would be shared to this path inside of the Vagrant box, Vagrant data. I'm going to demonstrate that in a few minutes. Last but not least, there's something called provisioning, which I touched on earlier. And the simplest form is just running a shell script. So this provision, whatever you specify here under the path, the shell script will be run when the Vagrant box is brought up for the first time. So provisioning. Provisioning can be done with many different tools. Like I said, the simplest is definitely the shell script provisioner. If you write a shell script to do the steps that you need to install things, that's like the bare bones tool. But there's also configuration management tools you can use, like Puppet, Chef, SaltStack, or Salt. And I'm going to go through how to use those. All right. So let's look at provisioning. All right. So here's my Vagrant file for this provisioning 1 box. And you can see it's using a base box. It's got network address specified, which I'm going to copy right now. And it's got a share folder, which is this share directory here. Don't worry too much about that. This is just a PHP file that I'm sharing to all the different Vagrant boxes so we can see the difference. The important part here is that we're going to use this shell script to provision with, and it's called provision.sh. And if we open up that shell script, we can see that all it does is run apt-get update, which is update all the packages on the system, and then install Git, Apache 2, and PHP. So if we watch this thing get booted up, it's the problem with live demos. It's going to take a little bit, and you get to watch all this, kind of use this output. All right, so right now the machine is coming up. Cool, and now at this point, you can see here it says running provisioner shell. So that's where the shell script starts. Now it's running apt-get update, which is all this green output. And then at some point right here, yeah, right here is where we install Git, and then we install Apache. So if we visit this URL in our browser, we can see the output of that shared file that we created. And you can see that the PHP version and also the IP address that we came in with. So you can imagine how, you can see how quickly, I guess, you can bring up a new box and install the pieces that you need on that box. Does anyone have questions on provisioning or anything? There really isn't any limits to what you can do. Provisioning is meant to configure the server for what you need. So you would install memcache and stuff like that. Actually setting your Drupal, or sorry, we're not at a Drupal conference, we're at a nerd conference. In setting up your whatever you're using to use that caching is a separate thing where you would probably do that in the code base somewhere. Yes, exactly. Yep. All the packages, making sure they're the right versions and stuff like that. And so you can imagine if you have a production server, it's got a lot going on. It's got probably firewalls. It's probably got you know, just a lot of packages. It's got a lot of different services that you need to configure. And so you can see that trying to do all that with a shell script is going to get kind of crazy. This was a really simple example, just getting Apache and PHP on there. But what happens when you need, let's say, to configure a MySQL server with a user, a specific user that your site is going to use, and you need a new database in there. So for that, I typically turn to a provisioning tool called Puppet. Has anyone used Puppet before? A couple of people. Cool. So Puppet, yeah, like I said, it's a configuration management tool, and the purpose of it is to specify the configuration for a server or for any computer in a way that it's static, so your computer can always know whether it matches the configuration or not. I'm not going to go too deeply into like the syntax or anything like that, but I just want to sort of demonstrate the crazy lengths you can go to using these configuration management tools with Vagrant. So this is my provisioning step for using Puppet. I give it a manifest path, and then I say what Puppet file I want it to use. So if we look at this base.pp file, this is more or less the same thing that my shell script did. I'm installing Git, Apache 2, PHP, and I just added MySQL for good measure. So if we watch this one come up, it's like watching grass grow. All right. So ignoring these warnings, there's a lot going on in this, basically as this computer comes up, and typically Puppet, Vagrant, and VirtualBox don't always play together the best. There are a lot of like deprecated warnings and stuff like that that happen. Most of the time you don't need to worry about those. It'll be a fatal error if something goes horribly wrong. So if we look here, we can see that we installed PHP, we installed MySQL, and we installed Apache. And so looking at this output, again, we know we have PHP and Apache installed on the server because this PHP file loaded. All right, now let's talk about something cool. There's a lot that you can do using a configuration management language like Puppet. And I've put together kind of like an extreme example. Again, in my Vagrant file for this third Vagrant box, I just have a little bit of stuff specified that says use this base.pp file to kick things off. I also have a module path, which means include these additional Puppet modules. And you can maybe see this, that the Puppet modules that I have here, well, it doesn't really matter. All right, so let's take a quick look at this one. Up here, we're installing the MySQL client. We make sure that something called LCPHP is installed. And LCPHP is last call PHP. It's a Puppet module that we wrote specifically for installing PHP and sort of dependencies the way that we want. We include a tool called Composer, so that installs PHP's Composer package manager. And we include Drush, which is a shell tool for Drupal. We're going to come back to this part in just a second. We have Xdebug on this machine, and we set up a default vhost pointing to var www. So the other thing that I did here is use something called SOCAT, which allows you to tunnel MySQL connections from one computer to another. So, or it allows you to tunnel a lot of things, but here we're using it to tunnel the MySQL connections from one computer to another. So what that means is that inside of that Vagrant box, we don't need to have MySQL installed, but we can leave our database settings for the Drupal site that I'm going to bring up in there pointed to what's called localhost, and it will still work. And the reason that we do that is when you switch back and forth between Vagrant boxes, you don't want to be changing IPs in your code base all the time. So it's nice to be able to leave your site pointed at localhost for a database, and you'll have your database running on your physical machine. You'll have PHP and whatever layers you have inside your Vagrant box running in there, and those two can talk to each other very easily.
Could you have MySQL running in another Vagrant box?
Sure. Yep, definitely. Yeah, if you were going to do that, yeah, there's no issue. You could just bring your MySQL Vagrant box up on a similar IP, and then they can talk to each other. Let's see. So if we bring this up, I'm going to go through that boot process one more time. Does anyone have questions while we're here?
Just kind of go over again the distinct jobs that Vagrant has versus what virtual boxes have actually.
Sure. Yeah. So Vagrant is kind of a wrapper around VirtualBox. At the core, VirtualBox runs, and so VirtualBox's responsibility is just bringing that machine up and having it running. Vagrant takes care of. So if you think about it, VirtualBox just brings up the base box. So whatever you've specified for your base box will get booted by VirtualBox. Vagrant will, once that box is up, configure it to use the network settings that you've specified, which is something you could do in VirtualBox, but it's a quick, easy way to do it. It will create your shared folder. It could do things like provision the number of processors and all that kind of stuff that for VirtualBox. But the really important thing is that it will take the base box and then add the provisioning steps to it. So the provisioning layer is really the important part there. And so you can have a single base box that serves a whole bunch of different functions. So that's the primary distinction.
So for Vagrant, you can do all the stuff with VirtualBox alone. Vagrant's just a tool to make it easier.
Yep.
And more useful.
Yep. those two things. The other thing is it's a lot easier to distribute Vagrant boxes because a Vagrant box is just the Vagrant file and then whatever provisioning you have. So
It's like a recipe.
yeah, it's a lot like a recipe. So if we look at this folder, I mean this basic folder here, I don't know how well people can read this, but all that's in here that matters is this Vagrant file. So you could commit this to a Git repository, share that out to your team, and then your team can have the exact same stuff as you do. And the base box, this is something I didn't demonstrate because I wasn't sure of the Wi-Fi here, but the base box is actually downloaded from the Vagrant cloud the first time you bring the box up. So all you have to do is give your team this Vagrant file, and you're sharing the same environment. So that's really the beauty of it. The other cool thing that it gives you above and beyond VirtualBox is the ability to version your configuration, which is kind of inherent in having a file and version control. But yeah, we at Last Call we use it. We make kind of a lot of changes, and it kind of causes a lot of headaches. But yeah, we change our boxes pretty frequently, and that just all gets pushed out to the team. So checking back in on this this box that we're bringing up, you can see it's doing a whole lot of stuff, installing Apache and configuring it, setting up a default vhost for Apache, installing Apache modules, so on and so forth. We've open sourced this LCPHP module, or Puppet module, so if anyone would like to use this, you're welcome to. In addition, all of these boxes that I've been bringing up and down will be available on GitHub following the presentation, so if you're curious, go ahead and dive in. So let me just visit that box. Cool. So that's our box that has all that configuration inside of it. And you can see here that I have 3 computers running inside my computer right now. 56 with IP 56, 7, and 58. And I mean, feasibly, these could be totally different. They could be different distributions. You know, we could have a different version of PHP running on each one, and using share folders, since this file is the same between all 3, you could test your site under 3 different versions of PHP at once, or as many as you wanted. Does anybody have questions about that?
How does it deal with virtual hosting? What if I think IP addresses are ugly and I don't like to look at them a lot, and I want
Yeah.
a pretty URL?
Yeah.
How do I handle that?
Well, that's a great question. Personally, I stick with IP addresses because I'm bringing these things up and down all day long. But you could very easily.
I mean, if you're working on a couple of sites at once, it could be difficult at a glance to tell the difference between 54, 55, 66, and remember which one is which necessarily. I mean, until it goes into what it is. But
Yep. You could give them host names in your host file.
that's just on the host machine, on your physical machine.
Yes, this is on exactly on my MacBook
And
Pro.
so, like, you do that yourself by hand, or if you had a virtual host management GUI app kind of a thing.
Yep.
It's just the same. The IP is the IP, and you resolve it to that.
Yep.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
simply enough.
Yep.
So, let's say you've gone through all of this, you've developed that app,
Mm-hmm.
now you have to push it to the production server.
Yep.
That's obviously not running VirtualBox.
Right. Right.
How does that translate?
Okay. So that translation has to happen before you start. We have to back it way up. And so when you're building your Vagrant box, you'll typically start with a base box that matches the distribution. So if your production server is running Debian Wheezy, you'll have a Debian Wheezy base box. And what you'll do is, as you configure your production server, or afterwards, you could go back and sort of do a catalog of what is on the production server. And so you would do all of that as provisioning steps. So you would need to make sure that that matches ahead of time before you do your development, before you even bring the Vagrant box up. Yep.
So basically, you've gone from something that's scripted
Mm-hmm.
to something now you're doing nothing. So what's
Sure.
the advantage of which button? Well, of course, you're doing the planning, you're doing the architecture in that respect, but what I'm talking about is maybe you're doing something on the fly.
Yep.
You have a basic idea, as you said, recipe,
Mm-hmm.
and you pretty much have your notes.
Yep.
And you just want to push.
So
Slipstream.
there is. So configuration management tools, Puppet, Chef, Salt, those three are something that you can deploy onto production servers, and that's something you can use to configure your production server. So the best thing you could do in that scenario is to use the exact same configuration modules and all that for your production server, and then also use those in your Vagrant box. So that's sort of the missing element, I think.
Are hosting providers, to any extent, starting to provide like pre-configured Vagrant boxes to match their stock configurations of servers?
I was going to say no, but I know that Pantheon does. Well, Kalamuna does for Pantheon. Pantheon is a sponsor here, actually. So you can get a pre-configured Vagrant box using, they have a tool called Calabox, which is basically a GUI for doing all the crazy stuff we've just done. And you get a box that's configured the same way that Pantheon is. Eric, do you know if Acquia, are you guys releasing any
Right now,
Vagrant
we're
boxes
focusing
for the
more on
cloud?
the dev desktop and
Okay.
dev environments in our cloud, but there is movement toward trying to work either with Calabox or Kalamuna or with, some of our intro guys do have Vagrant boxes for our
Sure.
infrastructure, but
Yeah.
two are different. We don't work the same way the Pantheon does, so we operate so far exactly.
Right. And are there any tools to almost like reverse engineer that so that you don't have to, like, if you don't completely understand everything about that server configuration, you just want it to match.
Yep.
Agnostic about what it is.
I don't know. That's a great question. Yeah, that would be awesome if there were. I'm not aware of anything. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely take it with a grain of salt. I mean, it's really complicated to configure a server,
Right.
obviously, and
Like,
so
it's one thing if you got a guy who can configure production servers, who then can also set up your Vagrant boxes.
yeah,
Because everybody's happy then.
yeah.
Lose a lot of time.
Like I was saying, the absolute best case scenario is to be using a configuration management tool for your production servers and to share that configuration management with your whole team, the developers, the sysadmins, everybody's using the same stuff. So that's what we're moving towards, and I think that that's sort of the way forward. Cool. So I have a few more slides here, and then we can chat a little more. I'm not going to actually demonstrate creating a new base box because it's pretty complicated, but the stuff that you would do is I would recommend starting from an existing base box. You can start from scratch if you want, but it gets more complicated. So if you do have a base box that's loaded up in virtual machine, or VirtualBox, excuse me. Install only the pieces you know you're always going to need on your base box. Run cleanup, meaning all the package caches and all that stuff. Make sure that that's out of there because you want your base image to be as small as possible. And then you can export the box file with the Vagrant package command. You upload it to a place that's going to host the actual box file. Vagrant Cloud is one option for that. And Vagrant Cloud, at their free tier, will not host your .box file. They'll host the definition of it so that you can allow people to publicly access that, just using, let's say, rbalis/debian-wheezy. But the actual box hosting, for us anyways, is happening on S3, which is a really good service to use for hosting these kind of big images that aren't downloaded so often. All right, so as a conclusion, Vagrant is a tool. It's a super awesome, really powerful tool, and I would definitely recommend using it. It helps sort of push best practices and really make development a sustainable, long-term thing. Yeah, I'm psyched about it. These are some links to use. I will talk about Vagrant Cloud in just 1 second. I'll demo their website. But okay, so Vagrant Up is the Vagrant site. Vagrant Cloud, we'll talk about. VagrantBox.es is a list of public boxes. Puppet Labs has a few of their own Vagrant boxes, which are really nice to start from. And then this is the repository URL for this presentation demo. For the links? Yeah. And again, this whole presentation will be on the Nerd Summit site afterwards, right, Jamie? There's a place to upload.
Yeah.
Okay. Jamie helped build the Nerd Summit site, so yeah, Jamie.
So last week I was installing Xdebug.
Yep.
And I destroyed my whole local environment in the process.
Yep.
And so is Vagrant, so I don't care so much about matching production. I just want Drupal locally, not broken. Is Vagrant a valid use case for that? And how much time am I going to have to sink into for that simple use case? Just having Xdebug and a place that I can
Not very long, because you can just download someone else's pre-built thing. So you could use the one in this presentation. There are Vagrant boxes on Drupal.org that are pre-set up. Yeah, where you would run into a lot of time and fixes and stuff is when you start to do your own custom boxes. That can get a little time-consuming. It's worth it, but...
I was just talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that Xdebug sometimes slows things down. Is it difficult to hot swap between an Xdebug enabled Vagrant box and a non-Xdebug enabled one?
I mean, if you're talking about performance, probably the best thing you could do is run only one at a time. But yeah, I mean, you could bring them up and down as you want. So you could either have an Xdebug enabled one running and a non-Xdebug one running, or you could just bring them up and down as you want.
And in terms of MySQL, you're always relying on like your local OS X MySQL install. Is that what you do, or do you
That's choice for our company, but I mean that's certainly not what everyone does. Yeah, we just found it easier to keep the MySQL databases on the host machine so that we don't need to worry about importing them and creating users and stuff like that. Yep.
So just a spiel for I'm doing an Xdebug session this afternoon.
Oh, you are?
Over in the rooms, but you also might look into something like Homebrew or Boxen, which
I was using
manage your
Homebrew.
local machine. This Vagrant is great because you can kind of encapsulate everything that you already
Yep.
in the VM
Yep.
inside your box.
Yeah, that is a good point, actually. So Vagrant is always going to be slower than having a local development environment. It's a trade-off. So would you prefer to have the isolated environment where things could feasibly match production, or would you prefer to have the speed? Yeah, from my experience, I'd prefer to have the matching production environment, but you can do whichever you would like. Yep. Yeah. So this is my contact info. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to hit me up. Did anyone have any other questions at this point? Cool. Thank you.
I think you should be able to upload that on your profile.